it is a amazing piece of work, of writing. I could gush on and on. I'm not going to. You'd much rather listen to the actual people who did the writing. So I will stop gushing and just introduce Dan.
I simply stand on the shoulders of others. So it's being so close to Veterans Day, it's fitting that this morning's program is author readings from Unbreaking the Circle, an anthology of writings by New Mexico military, their family members, and caregivers. A short bit of history of the whole program, because I don't want to take time away from the main event. But the book contains 120 stories, poems, and essays by 67 contributors, actually 69, I believe, hailing from more than a fourth of New Mexico's 33 counties. And a fifth of those authors had never been published before, which is the real success to my mind. Next slide, please. So published by SouthWest Writers, it was made possible by a grant from, next slide, please, New Mexico Arts, an office of the Cultural Affairs Department under their Arts and Military Initiative, administered by Kevin Lenkner. New Mexico Arts' stated objective is to connect the military with the arts, but that only tells the story by half. Since art is expression, and expression is ideally a communication, its full intent is not to connect the military to the arts, but through the arts to those outside their immediate circle, to spark a conversation and forge connections. This book represents the first phase of our attempt to do just that, because everybody's got their own spin on how to make that happen. So we did it by encouraging people to preserve and share their histories by committing their stories to paper for the benefit of the reader. And the ensuing readings, such as today's, represent phase 2. The writer is sharing their feelings and thoughts in person for the benefit of the authors themselves, an act which is equally challenging and can provide even more catharsis. So if you like what you hear today, please join us in supporting other contributors to our next 2 readings, which were mentioned a moment ago. Next slide, please. Next Saturday, November 8th from 10 to noon at the Estrabón Library in Rio Rancho, being hosted by our own Carl Hitchens there in the front. Raise your hand, Carl, if you would. And Saturday, December 6th at the same time at the Bernalillo History Museum, curated by Janet Walraven. In addition to Janet and Carl, thanks to all the others who stepped up to the plate to host these readings. You can see their names there on the right. Jim Tritton, Kathleen Hessler, Jacqueline Marie Loring, and Rose Marie Kern, Leonie Rosensteel, Paula Nixon and Pat Hodap, and Mike Whalen. Next slide, please. And this work owes a special debt to retired Navy Commander Jim Tritton. As SouthWest Writers is an all-volunteer organization, it relies on the initiatives of its members, as Judy aptly pointed out, for all of our programs, offerings, and outreach. 2 years ago, Jim's pathfinding work formed SouthWest Writers' collaboration with New Mexico Arts and produced SouthWest Writers' inaugural military anthology, Holes in Our Hearts. And a great thank you also to the entire board of SouthWest Writers, past and present, for their continued support of this very worthwhile program. So, next slide, please. Now to the good stuff. Our first reader, Maria Robles-Meyer, has a strong background in public policy and communications, the foundation of her leadership training business, teaching, and writing, and her lyrical style and facility with metaphor are showcased in a beautiful tribute to her cousin, Ernesto Cordero. Maria?
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. And well, I'm getting emotional before even starting. So taking a deep breath, it's a great honor to be included in this very important project. So thank you for allowing me to share my cousin's story. I'm going to be reading, in the interest of time, an adaptation of my essay that appears in the anthology. Quite fittingly, we're in the midst of the Mexican celebration of the Day of the Dead, the final Dia de los Muertos being tomorrow. This is a time that asks us to remember our loved ones. But as I pose in my piece, how do we remember when we have no memories to draw from? The strands that bind. In serpentine fashion, the strands of the helix twist and turn, linked by outstretched hands, forming bridges between pasts unknown and futures yet to be discovered. These invisible threads bind us across generations, stitching their stories into the blueprint of our being. A silent script written in code, they connect us to long-lost ancestors and their untold stories. But I don't need DNA to know that we're related. The few photographs of my cousin, Sergeant Ernesto Cordero, reveal the same downturned mouth that runs in our family. It looks to some like it might describe a stern expression, but I see it as being a great poker face. Ernie resembled his mother, my great aunt, who in turn resembled her mother. Since childhood, I've been told I looked exactly like Mom, who was the image of hers. These invisible strands cross time and generations, creating unseen bonds with those we will never meet. Frozen in time, he poses proudly in his dress uniform. In another, he's crouching down next to a dog. Our families always loved their pets. The grainy photos date back to World War II, when he served in the U.S. Army, landing in the Philippines with MacArthur. My mother recalled how when she was small, movie theaters played newsreels before every feature, updating the public about the latest battle in far-off lands. There was a time when the family was certain they'd seen Ernie carrying a stretcher. Their pride in his service was laced with silent prayers for his safety. But there was no time for photos in Korea. Following the end of World War II, and after a few nomadic years, Ernie re-enlisted in the Army. In 1950, around the time two scientists, Watson and Crick, were conducting research that would lead to the discovery we know today as DNA, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel. The U.S. swiftly intervened, and though never officially declared a war, the police action sent over 1 million Americans into battle. Ernie's unit, the 9th Infantry Regiment, landed in Busan that July, among the first deployed. The early days were devastating for American forces. Troops lacked manpower and equipment to halt the North Korean advances. Their mission simply was to slow down the enemy's momentum. Official reports state that on the night of August 31st, Sergeant Cordero and Fox Company defended a critical perimeter along the Naktung River. North Korean forces launched a massive assault. Survivors described an eerily and endless torchlight parade of advancing troops. By dawn, the lines had collapsed. Amid the chaos and retreat, Sergeant Cordero was lost. My grandparents, his aunt and uncle, were his next of kin, so they received the dreaded telegram and later his few possessions. An unmailed letter to the family that describes the suffering of eternal nights, along with a record he had made in a recording booth set up for service members. With an almost foreboding sense of his outcome, he says that he will sing a song to remember him by. Que eternas son mis noches, que lenta es mi agonía. How eternal are my nights, how slow is my agony. And there, his story paused for what would become decades. When I was small, Ernie's name was on that dutiful list included in my nightly prayers. We all knew of Cousin Ernie's story in an abstract way, a name without memory. In 2000, now half a century later, while working in Washington, D.C., I learned of a program for families of service members declared missing in action. Originally created to account for the MIA from the Vietnam War, the program had been expanded to include all unaccounted for American service members. Within an hour of my call, a representative from the U.S. Army was on the phone explaining to me that our family was exactly the kind of people this program was meant for. That is how I discovered the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. The DPAA's mission is to account for every American service member still considered missing from past conflicts. Their work spans the globe, scientists and historians piecing together fragments of battles long past. Since then, our family receives yearly updates on efforts to find and identify remains, invitations to briefings and government ceremonies. And through it, we learned that Ernie was likely not taken captive, but killed that night along with so many others. At one of these briefings, I sit as a gloved hand swabs my mouth. Ernie's and my link through the maternal line makes me a good candidate to provide DNA samples, to be compared to the pieces of remains they've gathered and continue to gather in hopes of finding those familial links. The process reawakened that silent, enduring thread of connection. The DPAA's efforts have advanced DNA recovery over the years, and in order to advance the science and compensate for the deteriorating conditions of older remains. In Ernie's case, the chaos of early war and the embalming methods make it really difficult to identify if there is the case that he is found. Yet the search continues for him and others, fueled by persistence and hope. Today, Ernie's name is etched in the courts of the missing at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Hawaii and on the Korean War Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. I can only imagine my grandmother's awe at seeing his name memorialized in such a stately way. We never observed Dia de los Muertos in my family. Our day of remembrance was Memorial Day. It may seem strange, but I have the fondest of memories of visiting the cemetery, meeting cousins, running along the vast open spaces. My grandmother would dutifully bring blooms from her garden to add to the vibrant colors of the plastic wreaths that adorned the graves. Last year, over Memorial Day weekend, 4 generations of my family gathered to celebrate an aunt's 90th birthday. And of course, the trip involved a visit to the cemetery. I'm grateful to my cousins who are local and continue the tradition of ensuring the growing number of family plots are decorated for the holiday. And this time, there was one new one, a marker for Ernie placed at the foot of his aunt, my grandmother. It's part of the DPAA's mission to provide these headstones, placeholders for the day his remains might be found. Yet after all these years, I wonder if the physical pieces are really necessary. In a way, he's already come home. His name, his story are rewoven into our family's fabric, no longer lost to time. This year marks 75 years since Cousin Ernie went missing, more than twice the lifetime he was able to live. How do his story and those who shared his silent fate continue? Memories for the living, to ground us, to bind us. But even without memory, the strands remain, waiting once again to link past to present to future. Thank you.
Our second reader, Ben White, had a 22-year career in the U.S. military, which included time in both the Army and the Coast Guard. Having earned his MFA from the University of Tampa, he now teaches at UNM. Though Ben writes in short lines, he eschews the term poet, considering himself instead a witness, capturing instances as they're formed by the momentary confluence of time, place, and perspective, and pinning them to the page. So Ben, if you would.
Good morning. And thanks, Dan, for one, for selecting the work that joined into the anthology with the other real writers. And two, for inviting me here today, because I've said it before, writers don't feel like writers as much as when they get to read. And that's a great opportunity. But for those of you who thought you were going to come and just listen, I've got an audience participation task. It's a very hard thing to do. I have 11 poems in the anthology, but I'm going to read 3 this morning. But they've all entered a raffle, and you get to decide the number. So the first number I hear between 1 and 11, inclusive, will be where I start. 14. 14. 7. I heard 7 first. Well, I heard 14 first, but number 7 is called Manhole Cover. It's straight out of Germany when I was with the Army. We always ran, and the manhole cover was always there. But when we ran in the cold, in the oblivious platoon trance, the different color beneath us made us think it was ice. So the whole formation would get out of step. No left, right, left, but more of a oh skip. It would have probably been safer if we had simply slid on a frozen patch of concrete instead of bumping into each other to avoid the dark spot on the sidewalk. Thank you. 8. They're at random in here too. 8 is an actor. It's actually one of those poems that has a puzzle in it. The first letter of each sentence spells out a secret message. It's actually also from the Army in 1984. The Olympics were in Los Angeles. I happened to be in Italy on vacation. I know. But it's written for Mary Lou in 1984. Cold curtains were drawn on the 84 Olympics when the rings were hosted by Los Angeles, although the Soviets decided their athletes would not compete. Weapons pointed across foreign borders alerted us to political games, ruling out the doubt about where they were. One it is. And good. One is kind of all about, it's a catch-all for service. And it's called Ever Endured. In the rain, the snow, the heat, the cold, digging a foxhole in the sidewalk with a spoon, sequentially painting individual links of a chain, red, white, blue, red, white, blue, putting up camouflage nets to take them down, to put them up, to take them down, to put them up, to take them down. Time has a way of making the miserable the most meaningful experiences ever endured.
That is good stuff. Our third reader will be Carl Hitchens, who is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran of the Vietnam War. Through his writing, he seeks to serve as a voice of cultural, social critique, and criticism, much of which can be found on his website, Drum Talk. Today, he explores the ethos of military service and one of the guides, perhaps, who led him to embrace it. Carl Hitchens.
So this reading is entitled Kismet. I was somewhere around 7 years old. My paternal grandfather took me to Marine Corps Base Quantico, approximately 35 miles southwest of Washington, D.C., bounded by the Potomac River to the east and the Quantico Creek to the north. The Marine base flanks the town's other two sides. The word Quantico is a corruption of the name of a Doeg village, recorded by English colonists as Pamacocok. The Doeg were a Native American people who lived in Virginia, who spoke an Algonquin language and may have been a branch of the Nanticoke tribe of yours truly, based on the eastern shore of Maryland. The tribe's official land base now is Millsboro, Delaware. Poppy was a bus driver for the FBI for 40 years, taking FBI recruits to the FBI Academy located on the Marine base. Poppy became my dad's stepfather when my dad's dad passed away at a young age under what my dad's mom, grandmother Elsie, thought were mysterious circumstances. Grandmother remembered getting a phone call from the DC Metropolitan Police Department. The male caller inquired, "Are you Carl Hitchens' wife?" "Yes," she replied. "He's dead. We need you to come down to the morgue and identify the body." According to my grandmother, the medical examiner merely declared the cause of death to be a probable fall, resulting in a fatal head injury. Grandmother always believed foul play was involved. Poppy was popular with the FBI Academy and Marine Corps personnel. I'm sure because of his dependability, intelligence, and agreeable demeanor. On the aforementioned excursion to the base, we were invited to eat lunch at the officers' mess hall and treated like royalty. Guess I was just destined to join the Marines. On Poppy's 40th anniversary, he and my grandmother were invited to the FBI headquarters and, get this, take pictures with then FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Yep, I have copies of the black and white photographs that memorialize the event. Years later, as a young college dropout, trying to sort out what I wanted as a career path, I spent a lot of time watching Vietnam War news, reporting on national television. Naturally, I was drawn particularly to what the Marines were up to. From my introduction to the Corps as a youngster and replays of actor John Wayne doing his thing in the cinematic blockbuster, The Sands of Iwo Jima, I felt the plight of non-Marines more viscerally. When my dad, Carl Hitchens Sr., thought it was time to light a fire under my stagnation with a get a job or else demand, I figured it was time to go full on John Wayne's Sergeant Stryker persona. I had my father drive me down to the Marine recruiter, signed the papers, and became part of Marine Corps history. Speaking of destiny, when entertaining astrological prognostication, yeah, I know astrology is not exactly in the Marine Handbook for Battle Readiness. However, the Marines launched their attack on Iwo Jima at approximately 0900 or 9 a.m. on February 19th, 1945. I was born at 09:55 or 9:55 a.m. 1947. Might an element of kismet have been whetting my appetite for the few and the proud? Just saying. Okay. Time waits for no one. Time waits for no one, or so it is said. But it does linger at every tick-tock and a pendulum swing of space and matter, for viewing oneself beyond the zeitgeist of consequential periods of history, of a time, space, and place brimming with facts and factoids, defining the who, what, and how, of time colliding with matter in the passing on to posterity wisdom for human survival. Like sand trickling through an hourglass of seasons, cascading backward toward life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness rising and falling on the cadence of our jungle boots. Back in the day, far from home in the land of the free. leaving shadowy silhouettes of heroes, villains, or victims of misfortune, haunting the gray matter of historians and future generations seeking to penetrate the nexus of mystery surrounding our war and peace rendering. Beyond the story told at a distance of so-called dispassionate objectivity. But to know us, our true story, you have to live it through our eyes, through our feelings, through our blood and sweat, through our fear, reigned into bravery. You must mind meld with us, absorbing the battlefield fait accompli of all wars, past and present, one boot in front of the other, through ambushes, landmines, booby traps, rockets, grenades, and automatic weapons fire. Notwithstanding our own already on the way, coming up short and shuffling Sarge off this mortal coil for God and country. Those at home sitting on pins and needles, wondering if it's worth it, is it necessary? Here's a chord to play in the musicality of marching orders. If it's a just war for self-preservation, you're damn right it's worth it. Submission to tyrants is not freedom. However you sugarcoat your bondage, it will poison you and deny you the so-called American dream. So you, powers that be, when sending us into harm's way, make sure your bugling and drumming are in the key of justice and not just us of financial gain and greed. There are enough tombstones in the world to go around, albeit the greatest casualty is being forgotten. So get it right, because we are warriors sent harm's way that pay the price. Pay the price. Pay the price. Thank you for listening.
It is just so nice that those thoughts, those feelings are captured for eternity. Yeah, that's what it's all about. I can say from personal experience that Earl Rugen is an enviably upbeat person to be around, humble and steadfast. He proudly served in Vietnam from 1968 to 1970 in the U.S. Army's 571st Dust-Off Helicopter Ambulance Unit. He is a longtime member of the VA Therapeutic Writing Group at the Raymond G. Murphy Medical Center. And through his writing, Earl creates memorials to friends who never made it fully back. His first book of poetry is nearing publication. Earl Rugen.
First, I want to thank Southwest Writers and Dan for the encouragement. And also, I didn't realize I had something in common with Carl because I flunked out of school also, but I didn't have the courage to join the few, the proud, and the Marines. I didn't have, so I went in the Army. But anyway, thank you all. Okay, this is called Soldiers. Some the jungle, some the mountains high, some the valley, some the delta. Why? Why were we there? Why should we care? Curious ways count the days till I go back. The real world, so far away, the flag unfurled. I never knew, not too much fun. The past would haunt. I'd come undone. Thank you.
Our next reader, Dida Dow, spent over 30 years in law enforcement and private investigation. That work gave her a sharp eye for detail and deep psychological insight, which she incorporates in short stories, motivational writing, and as a lyricist. Today, we'll see a foray into a fourth form, memoir, as she recounts her daughter's entry into the military. Dida Dow.
Thank you, Dan, for letting me include my story in this book. It's called Sticky Notes of Love. The morning the sun rose with an almost smug sense of normalcy, oblivious to the emotional tectonic shift happening in my world. It was the day we were taking my daughter. To the military processing center. A day that had crept up with stealthy precision, tucked away between soccer games, prom dresses, late night study sessions, and the countless "Mom, can you help me with this?" requests. I should have been prepared. After all, my husband had served, my dad, my brother, my uncle, an entire lineage woven with the fabric of military pride. But nothing in my genetic or emotional arsenal prepared me for this. The ride there was filled with a clamor of emotions and a suspicious lack of conversation. She sat in the back seat, her face a canvas of determination, excitement, and perhaps a dash of nerves she'd never admit to. I, on the other hand, was practicing the art of looking proud while screaming inside. My husband gripped the steering wheel with the kind of intensity usually reserved for movie car chases, his jaw set, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses that probably weren't just for the sun. When we arrived, everything moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Clipboards, signatures, last-minute checks, the world bustling around us as if this wasn't the most pivotal moment of my life. I watched her step forward, her back straight, her eyes locked on the path ahead. Then came the oath. She raised her hand, her voice steady and sure, reciting words that have echoed through generations. And my heart swelled with pride. So full, it almost drowned the ache underneath. And then just like that, she was gone. 7.5 weeks of basic training, 7.5 weeks of not hearing her voice, except for 3 very short phone calls she made. 7.5 weeks of wondering if she was okay, if she missed us, if she was eating enough. And I thought those tears would wait until I got home. They didn't. But the real surprise was the laughter that sneaked in when I walked into her room. There, amidst the remnants of her teenage world, was an unexpected treasure trove of yellow Post-it notes. They were everywhere, like a swarm of paper butterflies left behind with surgical precision. Save this, one declared, slapped on a stack of books she never actually read. Donate this, attached to a collection of clothes that had survived numerous closet purges. I don't care what you do with this, casually affixed to what looked like a tangled mess of charging cables, mystery cords, and what I suspect was a petrified gummy bear. And then there were the gems. Mom, don't even think of touching this. Boldly guarding her coin jar as if I had secret plans to fund my retirement with loose change. But the most noteworthy, no pun intended, was the note left on the fish tank. Go ahead, flush the fish down the toilet. I stared at the little guy lazily swimming around, very much alive and blissfully unaware of his pending doom. I couldn't do it. He wasn't even belly up yet. We shared a moment, that fish and I, both of us left behind, both of us unsure of what came next. The days that followed were filled with a strange mix of missing her presence and discovering her quirky sense of humor embedded in every corner of the house. I found notes tucked in places she knew I'd eventually find. If you're reading this, you're probably avoiding doing the dishes. Go do them. Remember to water the plant, or don't. It's probably dead anyway. Her absence was palpable, but her spirit lingered, wrapped in wit and post-it adhesive. Pride and sadness danced together in my heart, often stepping on each other's toes. But with every note, every memory, every quiet moment, I realized that this was part of the journey. Not just hers, but mine too. I was learning to let go, to trust in the person she'd become, to find comfort in the chaos of change. 7.5 weeks later, the phone rang. Her voice was like music, slightly more confident, slightly more grown up, but still undeniably her. She laughed when I told her about the fish. You didn't flush him? Seriously, Mom. He wasn't even dead, I defended, both of us laughing until the tears came. But this time they felt different, lighter, filled with pride, love, and the unshakable bond between a mother and her daughter. That day came too quickly and it changed everything. But it also left me with a room full of memories, a fish with an extended lease on life, and a heart forever proud of the brave young woman who raised her hand and took an oath to serve. Thank you.
A native son of Pittsburgh, Paul Gonzalez enlisted in the Army in 1966, including a year in Vietnam serving along with his brother Joe, not in the same location, as a combat medic, which ultimately led to a 46-year career as a radiology imaging specialist. Writing, especially in verse, provides an outlet for his innermost memories. And you are here today to witness probably the last public reading in New Mexico by Paul Gonzalez, who is getting ready to head to Arizona to live with his son. So glad we can hear you one last time, Paul.
Thank you very much. I consider it a privilege. I'm Spec 5 Paul Gonzalez, United States Army. Served in Vietnam, as Dad said, 1967 to 1968. My brother Joe and I were there at the same time. The title of this piece is called Listen Up. In mid-September of 1967, I received orders for Vietnam. I was assigned to Fort McClellan, Anniston, Alabama, Noble Army Hospital. McClellan was my first duty station after all my military training was complete as a radiologic technologist and a combat medic. I traveled with another private, Fred. Fred was a tall, lanky guy from Tennessee, kind of resembled a young Abraham Lincoln. Fred and I reported to the hospital and we met Staff Sergeant Jack. At the personnel office, Sergeant Jack took Fred and I to a long corridor and asked that we walk 50 feet, make an about face, and return to him. Fred and I followed Sergeant Jack's order and executed the walk. When we returned, Sergeant Jack stated, Gonzalez, come with me. Fred, report back to the first sergeant. I was assigned to the hospital staff, and Fred was assigned to an outlying clinic. I thought to myself, here it is, 1967, a Spanish-Italian kid from Pittsburgh, here in Alabama. Just my luck. Needless to say, I never left post alone for fear of meeting up with the KKK. My buddies from Michigan had regular names, so they would take me to their homes off post. One Saturday, we were at Chuck's house, a trailer where he and his wife Joan lived. We were drinking beer and listening to music, minding our own business, when we heard a loud knock at the door. When I opened the door, there stood an elderly woman with a gun. She said, if you don't turn that music down, I'll drop you where you stand. With eyes as big as full moon, I said, yes, ma'am, and welcome to Alabama. I did good at Noble, made rank rapidly. Specialist E5, became highly proficient as an X-ray technologist and a combat medic. Received several letters of commendation. My military career was fulfilling and rewarding. The thought of becoming a lifer was entertaining. I was a medic and damn proud of it. After several months at Noble, we were on first name basis, so I asked Sergeant Jack, what was the walk down the corridor all about, Jack? Jack said, I can tell by the way a man walks if he means business and has determination. I saw that in you, Gonzalez, so I wanted you on my team. Needless to say, confidence in myself soared. Upon receiving orders for Vietnam, I was thrust into the reality of what military service was all about. Everyone in radiology was saddened about my leaving. I felt indispensable, so I reported to the personnel sergeant and told him how valuable I was to the hospital and the radiology department. The personnel sergeant sat there and listened intently without emotion and grunted once or twice and leaned back in that government gray office chair and exhaled. After completing my speech on how valuable I was, the personnel sergeant rose, went to the water cooler, pulled a cup from the dispenser, and filled it with water. I felt my explanation of how valuable I was made him dry-throated. With the 5-ounce cup of water, the sergeant returned to where I was seated at the desk and placed the 5-ounce cup of water in front of me. I thought, how polite of him. He spoke softly but firmly. Gonzalez, put your finger in the cup of water. I was confused. What for, Sarge? I responded. Just do it, Gonzalez. I followed his order and inserted my index finger into the cup of water. Pulled it back. Did you see a hole in that water? Again, I was puzzled. Of course not, Sarge. Then that's how much you're needed here. I'll have you replaced in a week, Gonzalez. No soldier is indispensable. Do you understand me, Gonzalez? Immediately, I understood his point and quickly recalibrated my military response and simply stated, yes, Sergeant. I stood up purposeful and straight in military fashion and asked to be dismissed. The personnel sergeant said, before I dismiss you, you have 2 weeks to gather your gear, sign off this post, followed by a 30-day leave before you report to Fort Lewis, Washington for deployment to Cam Ranh Bay, South Vietnam. Understood? Understood, Sergeant. Then in a clear but firm military voice, he said, dismiss, specialist. In that brief encounter with the personnel sergeant, I was transformed from a naive 20-year-old to a well-disciplined soldier. It left no doubt in my military mind that I was dispensable and replaceable. I was to follow orders without question. Throughout my military enlistment and beyond, I accepted the military discipline and obedience. A quote from a retired general, to fight a war, you must become war. Thank you.
When Chuck Nemeth was born, Calvin Coolidge was still in office. He was raised in an immigrant family in northern Indiana, graduating from a small country high school with 21 of his fellow students. He was drafted into the Army during the Korean War. Afterward, he earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Denver in 4 years while working full-time. Then spent 30 years in the automotive industry and another 27 in a business he developed, until forced to retire at 85 due to macular degeneration. Still young at 97, He's become a prolific writer with 3 novels and some 50 short stories and essays to his name. Today, he explores the lighter side of the military. So Chuck, if you'd raise a hand if you want to stand up and Chuck has asked that I read for him today, so we will do that. And unlike Ben, who has had more years in the service than I did not put in a bookmark, so I'll learn one of these days. Slow student. So, Army Dogs by C.L. Nemeth. In my short Army career, I recall 2 stories about dogs. Since Captain Rush outranks Lieutenant Barrett, I will start with Rush's dog, Pooley. In Journey, we were living in a new caserne, barracks, which had the mess hall and all the offices on the main floor. The 2nd and 3rd floors housed we soldiers, while the 4th floor was the bachelor officers' quarters, called the BOQ. Access to the upper floors was provided by a stairwell in the center of the caserne. This stairwell was open with tile floors and stairs. Any noise made in the stairwell was immediately transferred to all floors. It was almost impossible to enter or climb the stairs without everyone in the caserne hearing it. To say it was noisy is an understatement. Pooley was a German shepherd. He had a pleasant disposition, and all of us petted and played with him. Captain Rush took Pooley almost everywhere he went, but when on base, Pooley would be chained outside at the rear of the caserne. The captain would come to the caserne at any time of the night, chain Pooley, and go up the stairs to his room on the 4th floor. One would normally think this would be the end of it until morning. If you do, you don't know the perverse minds of GIs. Captain would retire. Shortly, a half-loaded GI would return from his carousing. Pooley was there to welcome the prodigal. You should be able to guess the next. Invariably, the GI would release Pooley, hold the door open, and tell Pooley, "Find the captain." Pooley, being an obedient dog, would start up the stairs, yelping and whining, with toenails scratching on the tile floor. Reaching the 4th floor, he would scratch on the captain's door, whining all the while. Of course, this woke up almost everyone, including Captain Rush, who would come out of the room with the foulest of epithets. He would lead Pooley down the stairs, out the rear door, and chain him up. As he returned to his room, he would continue his tirade. Of course, the perpetrator of this disturbance was nowhere to be found. Almost always, after the caserne settled down and silence returned, another GI would arrive, and the entire event would be repeated. Those in the caserne who were not complaining were laughing. The captain found no humor in this and voiced it loud and long the next morning, but to no avail. This continued almost every night until Captain Rush was reassigned. We all missed Pooley. The second story would be diabolical if it were not so funny. Lieutenant Barrett had a registered boxer female. To say that the lieutenant was proud of his dog would not properly explain his love. We did not normally see the dog as he had it boarded off base. Now, Lieutenant Barrett was not one of the most admired officers on the base. Suffice it to say, he was the southeast end of a horse going northwest. Every time he came into the office, before departing, we would hear about his great dog and how he was waiting for her to achieve estrus so he could mate her with another registered boxer, and how much money he would receive for the resulting litter of pups. We were all required to qualify with rifles annually. This was usually a 3-day bivouac at the firing range and was the only time we camped out all year. It was a big event as it broke up the monotony of daily office duty. So it was that Lieutenant Barrett's boxer came into heat, and he could not wait until after supper when he could take the dog for her tryst. His mistake was that he had brought the boxer with him to the firing range. He left the dog at the mess tent while he was out on the firing range. Now, a sergeant in our outfit had a small male dog of dubious parentage who was with us. He, of course, sensed the female boxer's condition, and he was almost in a frenzy, making love to the boxer's rear knees since he was not large enough to do the job properly. Those of us around the mess tent were having a good time watching him, and of course, it did not take long for us to connive to help him with his love affair. Someone found a stout wooden crate. With one of us holding the boxer, several others put the small dog up on the box. I will leave the rest to your own perverse imagination. This went on for most of the afternoon. I feel sure that if that small dog were still to be alive, his thanks to we that were there would be profound and endless. After mess, Lieutenant Barrett left with his dog. For the next 3 months, all we heard from the anticipatory officer was how much money he would realize from the sale of his dog's progeny. It was most difficult to keep a straight face while he was in the office. As the days went by and the end of her confinement came closer and closer, the lieutenant's and our anticipation reached monumental proportions. Morning came, and the lieutenant walked into the office with a long face. As usual, someone asked if the pups had arrived yet, even though we were quite sure they had, looking at the lieutenant's countenance. Said the lieutenant, "Yes, she had them last night. I just don't understand it. Most of them look like Sergeant Dixon's mutt. I just don't understand." He left the office. Pandemonium broke out. Even Captain Stein, the adjutant, when told about it, roared with delight. I do not know how the lieutenant disposed of all his pedigreed dogs. Rosemarie Kern, President Emerita of Southwest Writers, is, as you'd hope and expect, a prolific writer. A retired air traffic controller and master gardener, her topic interests range from aviation to gardening to solar cooking and historical fiction, with, lately, some family history thrown in. Since World War I, her relatives have served in 4 of the U.S. military branches. Today, she recounts her grandfather's participation in the war to end all wars. Rose Kern.
How many people here know what the term doughboy means? Good. These days, you don't know if the generations that are current understand doughboy or where it came from, that it's just a soldier in World War I, foot soldier. The motorcycle doughboy was written as a memorial to my grandfather. So in the decade from 1845 to 1855, more than 1 million citizens of Prussia, later named Germany, fled to the United States to escape economic hardship and political unrest. Thousands flocked to farmable country in the Midwest. Joseph Nicholas Huser was the 3rd generation, son and grandson of blacksmiths. Joe was born in Ottenheim, Kentucky, but moved with his family to Hamburg, Indiana, as a child. In June of 1914, Germany became our foe in the war to end all wars. Suddenly, hundreds of people whose parents and grandparents had escaped persecution in Germany were faced with a situation wherein they had to take up arms not just against a political entity, but against cousins, customs, and their own heritage. The Husers were devout Catholics and avidly devoted to their adopted country. When World War I was declared in 1914, 25-year-old Joe Huser was called up in the first draft. He left his job as an automobile mechanic and reported to Camp Taylor, Kentucky, within a few days, even though his fiancée Isabel was ill. Originally, he was assigned to infantry, like most of them are. One day while standing duty, a captain came outside and couldn't get his motorcycle to start. Back home in Indiana, Joe owned and maintained his own Indian motorcycle. He offered his services, and in a few minutes, the vehicle was purring. The captain looked at him and said, "What are you doing in the infantry?" He requested a transfer to the motor pool, but the Army decided to send him to Camp Meigs, Washington, to act as a drill instructor. 3 months later, he left Washington for Halifax, Nova Scotia, where ships had gathered to take them all to Europe. In his memoir, Joe writes, "We left Halifax at 43 degrees below zero. We then hit one of the worst storms in the Atlantic.
In the mess hall at noon, dishes were sliding from one end of the table to the other. That was the last of my dining at sea. I lived on fig Newtons and peanut brittle for the rest of the voyage. Glad was I to have the top bunk so that when the other fellas got sick, I was high and dry. Well, they landed in Liverpool, crossed England to Southampton, where they boarded the boat to France. He saw time under fire before Joe's skills as a mechanic eventually did get him assigned to the motor pool. In one of his letters to home, he mentioned that no matter what vehicle he was working on, they ended up using Ford parts to fix it. A year into his tour of duty, Joe's fiancée, Isabel, died of tuberculosis. After the funeral, her sister Fanny took up a pen to let Joe know he was still in their thoughts, and this is his response. Somewhere in France, March 28th, 1918. Dear Fanny and all, received your letter this noon and was more than glad to hear from you. If you'll excuse our pencil, I'll endeavor to answer it right off, as tomorrow is mail day. It's no use trying to explain how glad I am to get letters, and especially from you folks, as I miss Isabel's letters very much, and yours helped to fill a big open gap. I received Mother's letters of February 17th and March 15th and answered it right away. Did you get it? Thanks for your sympathy. I can feel it, though I am a long ways off. I'm going to try and finish this by candlelight. Just came back from church. You know, this is Holy Thursday. Oh, yes, I go to church all right. It's the only way I have observed Lent, by going to Rosary in the evenings. We have a Knights of Columbus Hall not very far from camp. Believe me, that is quite a consolation. I'm working every day, and we fix them vehicles up with everything from Fords on up. Yeah, we have Fords, lots of them. It's about the first thing I saw before we ever got off the boat. I suppose you folk get more war news than we do. I know we don't get very much. Thanks for your offer to send me anything I want or need. I don't know of anything I would need or would like more than to hear from you oftener. You know, you always seemed like home, and really was home to me. How are all the boys? Would like to see you again just now, but not for a week or two, as we can't just defect and go back for a couple days. But we don't think it's going to last forever. Had a letter from Cousin Leo a few days ago. Army life must agree with him, as it does with me. I'm getting fat at it. Plenty of fresh air, as I'm out every day, all day long. Sometimes I get pretty lonesome, but then I look over a bunch of Kodak pictures I have, since it takes me right back to olden times. Well, Fanny, it's about time for taps to blow, and I'll have to blow out the candle. I'm sending love and best wishes to all. I'll try to write oftener in the future. Still the same, Joseph N. User, Private AEF Company Number 4. The changing face of the war ensured Joe saw a lot of the French countryside. One of his most significant memories began when a bulletin circulated announcing that anyone who wanted to go to the village of Lourdes, France, for the Feast of the Annunciation on March 25th, 1919, should apply for leave. Lourdes, France, was where Saint Bernadette was visited by a vision of the Blessed Virgin. Hundreds of people have traveled to that shrine since, where crutches and wheelchairs have been left behind by people who touched the healing waters. Joe served as an altar assistant at a mass in the Lourdes Basilica and obtained a small medal with the picture of Saint Bernadette, who is the patron saint of illness and of people ridiculed for their piety or poverty. In another memoir to his children, Joe wrote, "We went to Paris, where we were attached to a train going to Lourdes. We were there for 3 days. At night, it was a beautiful sight. About 500 soldiers in the parade, carrying candles and singing to the Blessed Mother. It made you proud to be one of them." Joe was honorably discharged on June 27th, 1919. At the time of his enlistment, he was 23 years of age, with black hair and blue eyes. 4 years later, when he returned from duty in France, his hair had turned white. Joe came home to Indiana and opened a successful tool and die company. Eventually, he married and had 6 children. He remained devout throughout his life, and his youngest daughter, this author's mother, was named Marie Bernadette. Like many who served, Joe's letters did not include complaints about fear, discomforts, or the horrors he must have seen. The thing he wanted and needed most from his family is simple communication. Letters that he could touch and read, and words of normalcy back home. Words that gave him hope of returning to a life that included warmth and joy.
I just want to say a very heartfelt thank you to everyone who read today. I just find these readings so moving. And I think, again, like you just said, I think about my own family and the veterans within my family. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. Can we please give these folks another round of